We've noted multiple different perspectives for how and when the tribulation could begin, but they all have one thing in common. This is Off the Cuff, and I'm Steve from TorahFamily.org. Let's talk about it. Regardless of timelines I've made in the past, or anyone else has made, this teaching will show you the two main elements we should be looking for concerning the start of the end times. I believe timelines are good to help consider all the different possibilities and how things could play out. They help keep us open and not be locked into our own single perspective. So, whatever timeline you currently hold to, please watch through this teaching and see if at least the beginning of your current perspective might need to be reconsidered. There's a lot to cover in this teaching, but I'm keeping it as concise as possible. That being said, you might still want to put the speed of this teaching at 1.5 or even at 2x. As many of you know, we believe very firmly to the words of Yeshua when he said the days of the abomination that causes desolation, spoken through the prophet Daniel, will be shortened. Now, Daniel mentions the abomination of desolation 3 times, in chapter 9, 11, and 12. However, it's only in chapters 9 and 12 where there's time allocation given regarding this event. Chapter 9 is regarding the 70 weeks, and chapter 12 discusses it with the 1,290 days. One thought I've had for some time now is that the 70 weeks are the cut short days of the 1,290. However, what if it's the 70 weeks that are actually cut short? As improbable as that may sound, it still needs to be on the table for consideration. In our teaching, The Tribulation's Cut Short Timeline, I presented a timeline for the 70 weeks based on everything beginning around the time of Shavuot, as seen here. However, if those 70 weeks are what's to be cut short, that means the next biblical possibilities for the tribulation to be cut down to is 1 year or 6 months. Today, we're looking at the 1 year possibility. Now, for those who may not know our teachings, yes, 1 year is a biblical possibility for the time of the tribulation. I know it may sound absurd to many, but I cover it in this teaching, the 1 year tribulation and the return of Yeshua. But in short, we're waiting for the marriage and marriage supper of the Lamb, where Yeshua takes his bride for the wedding. In the Torah, we see the command for when a man takes a bride, he is to have 1 full year with his bride. He must not be sent to war or have any other duty laid on him during that year. So, for Yeshua to keep this command, he can't go off to war for Armageddon until he's been with his bride for 1 full year. And Yeshua is the high priest in the heavenly temple. The high priest's main obligation is to go into the Holy of Holies once a year on the Day of Atonement. So, with this all in mind, it would seem the 1 day for Yeshua to take his bride and have 1 full year to be with her before he has this obligation again would be on the Day of Atonement after he has fulfilled this obligation. And remember, believers will know the day of his coming, just not the hour. Please see our written teaching titled Knowing the Day. That being said, the events of this previously noted timeline would mostly stay the same. It's just the 70 weeks of Daniel that are cut down to 1 year. So, instead of seeing this, it could look more like this. Having the 70 weeks delayed from starting on time and being cut down to 1 year. The 10 days of the first 5 seals would begin on trumpets, with the first resurrection taking place on the Day of Atonement. Then, the Battle of Armageddon beginning on the Day of Atonement 1 full year later. If you haven't, please watch our teaching titled The Day of Atonement in Prophecy. We cover many details within it, and it might be good to watch the teaching, The Tribulation's Cut Short Timeline, to see how the rest of this timeline fits with Scripture. Now, here's the thing. Habakkuk tells us here in chapter 2, the Antichrist is revealed on a moed, a holy day, that which is traditionally called a feast day. So, let it be known, the Antichrist is revealed on a feast day. This tells us, according to Habakkuk, the true calendar will be revealed when the Antichrist begins to rule. And, as I discussed in our teaching, Resurrection Day, this holy day is said to linger. We're told to wait for it. We're then told it will certainly come and will not delay, meaning it will come on time, just not the time many think. It wasn't until this year that I realized this could be addressing a calendar issue. Why would a holy day linger? It all depends on how the calendar is calculated. This year, because of how we believe the Hebrew calendar is to be calculated, we're a month behind most all other calendars. Thus, the holy days are lingering, but still come on time. You can see our two teachings on the calendar if you want to understand our perspective. We'll link them below. But the important thing to note here in Habakkuk chapter 2 is how the Antichrist is revealed on one of Yahweh's holy days. In fact, from what we see in other scriptures, it seems the Antichrist starting his rule is the actual start of it all. It's interesting how the words of Paul in Colossians chapter 2 seems to reflect the words of Habakkuk. He said, "Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ." The words "to come" in the Greek actually says to be about, or even to linger in coming. To linger. Could Paul actually be referencing Habakkuk here? Implying the start of it all begins with the Antichrist, and he comes on a feast day that lingers. Consider also Paul's words in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 that discusses the coming of the Antichrist. He said Yeshua won't come until the Antichrist is first revealed. Now, consider also what we read in verses 5 through 8. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, starting in verse 5. "Don't you remember that when I was with you, I used to tell you these things? And now you know what is holding him back, so that he may be revealed at the proper time. For the secret power of lawlessness is already at work, but the one who now holds it back will continue to do so until he is taken out of the way. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will overthrow with the breath of his mouth and destroy by the splendor of his coming." The Greek word for taken here actually means to become, to be born, or be created. There are two Greek words for out of the way, and they actually mean from midst, or from the midst. In the order they're given in the Greek, it would actually read as from midst created, or out of the middle to become. That's way different from what the translators give us. The Greek shows something coming, not something or someone being taken out of the way. This is huge and needs to be understood. So many use this verse to say the church is what gets removed through the rapture, and then the Antichrist is revealed. But that's not what the text says. Folks, I believe in the resurrection, and it happens before the tribulation, but all believers will be going through the first 5 seals of Revelation. It just depends on where you'll be when it all goes down. And make no mistake about it, the first 5 seals will be a time of horrible persecution. I've discussed that in other teachings. But the point here is, Paul's words here shows something comes on the scene for the Antichrist to take his position, not something or someone being removed. So, What could it be that comes on the scene for the Antichrist to be given his power? There's no doubt in my mind that which is to come on the scene will be the Ark of the Covenant and the original tent of meeting. The Ark will be the image of the beast, that which the second beast will set up in honor of the beast according to Revelation chapter 13, verses 11 through 15. If you haven't, you'll want to see our teaching, The Image of the Beast, which goes into detail why it's the Ark of the Covenant. And you'll want to see our teaching, What is the Idol of Jealousy, which goes hand in hand with that teaching. We'll link them both below. Please also notice here in this text from Revelation that the first beast will indeed be killed and be revived again. This goes right in line with Paul's words in 2 Thessalonians. Continuing with verse 9 from that text, the coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with the work of Satan, displayed in all kinds of counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders, and in every sort of evil that deceives those who are perishing. They perish because they refused to love the truth and so be saved. For this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie, and so that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth, but have delighted in wickedness. And remember, according to Habakkuk, the Antichrist's rule starts on a feast day that lingers. And looking at everything together, it's possible the Antichrist will come on the scene and most likely be accepted by many. However, it seems as if he isn't given his position until after he's killed and raised to life again. Now, I could be wrong on that, but it's a possibility. So, whenever things are to happen, it would seem there will be much building of anticipation towards a specific person right before whatever feast day things are to begin on. As I've noted earlier, the calendar we follow is a whole month behind most other calendars out there. That means we'll be in the 7th month when most others will be with the Jewish calendar in the 8th month. That's because our calendar is lingering behind this year. What's the significance regarding the 8th month? Well, believe it or not, the 8th month has biblical history that even foreshadows Revelation. You see, it was in the 8th month when King Solomon completed the first temple. However, it appears to be 1 year later when everything else was completed and brought into the temple for its dedication. And it's at that dedication that Solomon held where we see fire come down from heaven, just like we see in Revelation 13. And it's in the records of Solomon, just 2 chapters later, that we see the annual income of gold was 666 talents, a number also seen in Revelation 13. Much could be said regarding Solomon and the end times, but I'm saving all of that for a later teaching. But I believe the 8th month on the Jewish calendar should always be on our radar, simply because of the history it holds with King Solomon and the first temple. An interesting element to the 8th month is what comes afterwards, in the 9th month, the Jewish feast of Hanukkah. Now, you're saying, well, what's the significance? Well, looking at the possible timeline, we see in the Jewish 8th month, the Antichrist appears, sacrifices begin, and Jerusalem gets surrounded. Immediately after that, Jerusalem gets invaded and destroyed by the fake Antichrist, all in the 8th month. You can see our teaching, the Assyrian, to learn more about the fake Antichrist. But once he's defeated, the real Antichrist will make the decree to rebuild and restore Jerusalem. Thus, they will rededicate the tabernacle and everything with it after the destruction at their feast of Hanukkah. So, according to the Jewish calendar, the Antichrist could appear in the 8th month, but on the Hebrew calendar we follow, it would actually be taking place on the feast days in the 7th month. While they see it as something significant by way of King Solomon, it's actually all taking place on Yahweh's feast days in accordance with Habakkuk. Now, back to the book of Habakkuk. Did you know the author of Hebrews references Habakkuk chapter 2 as well? So many like to reference Hebrews chapter 11, the Hall of Faith, the chapter that discusses so many who conquered by living in faith, but also includes those who suffered by living in faith. Consider Hebrews chapter 11, verse 35. Others were tortured and refused to be released, so that they might gain a better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, while still others were chained and put in prison. They were stoned. They were sawed in two. They were put to death by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and holes in the ground. He distinguishes those who didn't suffer to those who had to suffer for their faith. Why would he discuss all these believers like this? Because of what he said literally right before in chapter 10. Hebrews 10:32. Remember those earlier days after you had received the light, when you stood your ground in a great contest in the face of suffering. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times, you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You sympathized with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property because you knew that you yourselves had better and lasting possessions. He continues in verse 35. So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. For in just a very little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one will live by faith. And if he shrinks back, I will not be pleased with him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who believe and are saved. Do you see it? He just quoted Habakkuk chapter 2. After chapter 11, he continues into chapter 12 saying, Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Habakkuk chapter 2, where the Antichrist is specifically referenced, is the foundation to the chapter figuratively referenced as the Hall of Faith. And then the opening of chapter 12 finishes it all off with giving us Yeshua's ultimate example of enduring the cross, scorning its shame, to sit down at the right hand of the throne of God. Again, this is all prefaced with the quote from Habakkuk chapter 2 that specifically discusses the coming of the Antichrist on a holy day that lingers. In closing, Habakkuk chapter 2 is what we're waiting for. We're waiting for that feast day that lingers, yet comes on time, which reveals the man of lawlessness. And knowing Paul said the Antichrist won't be revealed until something comes on the scene. Not something or someone taken out of the way. No, it's something that comes on the scene. And because of that, we must always stay alert right before the feast days to be on the watch for what's coming. So, we're watching for something to come on the scene first to pave the way for the Antichrist. I believe it's very likely it will be the Ark of the Covenant and the original tabernacle. We're not waiting for something to be removed or the church to be removed. And we know This will have to take place right before a feast day. That's when Habakkuk tells us the Antichrist begins his rule. This is how and when it all begins. This is how it happens. Again, you're waiting for something to happen, to appear. I believe very firmly it's the Ark of the Covenant with the tabernacle. And Habakkuk tells us it happens, he comes on a feast day. So that which paves his way has to be right before that feast day when he comes. So, regardless of what timeline you're currently holding to, remember, it has to start with these two elements. Well, that's all I have. Think about it. Pray about it. But more than anything, be a doer of the word and not a hearer only. Until next time, shalom.